Well, good morning, everybody. We welcome you to this, the House Education Committee voting meeting. We have two bills on our agenda this morning. Glad to see a very good turnout of members. And at this point in time, the chair is going to call on the secretary to take the roll.
Chairman Kleiner.
Present.
Representative Bowman.
Proxy.
Representative Christiana. Representative Emmerich.
Here.
Representative English.
Present.
Representative Fleck.
Here.
Representative Gillen.
Proxy.
Representative Burrow.
Proxy.
Representative O'Neill.
Here.
Representative Rapp. Representative Reese.
Here.
Representative Brock.
Here.
Representative Simmons.
Here.
Representative Tallman.
Present.
Representative Truitt.
Proxy.
Chairman Roebuck.
Here.
Representative Carroll.
Here.
Representative Clay.
Here.
Representative Conklin.
Proxy.
Representative Parkins.
Proxy.
Representative Longetti.
Here.
Representative Mulchaney. Here. Representative O'Brien. Representative Santasiro.
Here.
Representative Wheatley.
Here.
A quorum being present, we can then move forward on today's agenda. And the first bill that we have this morning is House Bill 1728. The prime sponsor, Saccone, is with us, and it deals with the national motto, "In God We Trust." At this time, the chair recognizes Representative Saccone for his remarks on his legislation. But before we begin to move forward on that, the chair recognizes Representative Reese to move the bill forward, and seconded by Representative Rock. Having moved the bill, at this time the chair will recognize Representative Saccone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Roebuck, also for allowing me to bring this bill before your committee. It's House Bill 1728 celebrates our national motto, and just for the committee members who don't have some of the background on it, we're coming up on the 150th anniversary of our national.
Before we begin,
Yes, sir.
let it be known that we do not allow videotaping when we have these meetings. So anyone who's doing a videotaping, we have a public record of the meeting being recorded, but we do not allow videotaping in this hearing. So if that's a
My understanding, that was just on the floor of the House, that the committee meetings were open for video and audio recording. That was, I was the president of another committee meeting where that was explained. If you're saying that that's against the rules of the House, I will certainly comply.
Before you continue, I'm going to ask David, you come up here for a moment, please. A sidebar with Chris.
Dang it. False start. You're getting my bad side, though. That's the problem. Man.
If there counsel with both members of the Democrat and Republican caucus, the decision is that no videotaping is allowed, and I will ask the gentleman to discontinue any videotaping. Chair thanks the gentleman, and at this time recognizes Representative Saccone. If you would like to begin remarks again, start afresh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank both chairmen again for allowing me to present this committee. As I was saying, many of the committee members may not be aware, but we're coming up on the 150th anniversary of "In God We Trust" on our coins, and so it wasn't until 1956 that it became our national motto. But this phrase "In God We Trust" has been with us an awful long time. It was first introduced to us by Francis Scott Key when, in 1814, when he wrote the Star Spangled Banner. He inserted it into the second stanza of the national anthem. But it was actually a Pennsylvania governor. This is the beauty of this, I think, James Pollock, our 13th governor, who had it put on our coins, because before Governor Pollock was governor, he was a U.S. congressman, and when he was a freshman congressman, he had the good fortune to take a room at a boarding house with another freshman congressman by the name of Abraham Lincoln, and they became friends. When Abraham Lincoln became president, he appointed James Pollock to the U.S. Mint, and as director of the U.S. Mint, James Pollock decided that we should put "In God We Trust" on our coins, and they ran that through the system. It was passed, and it's been on our coins since 1864. It's been that way ever since. You'll see that phrase also over the Speaker's chair in the U.S. Capitol. You see it obviously on all our currency. Many of you have noticed that. It's on the front steps of our Capitol right here. President Kennedy reaffirmed its importance by saying, "The guiding principle of this nation has been, is now, and shall ever be, in God we trust." So other presidents and Congresses have reaffirmed this motto. And I also wanted you to know that Governor Pollock was from Milton, Pennsylvania, in Northumberland County, and they're planning a huge celebration over there. Also, they're going to put the "In God We Trust" museum there in Pennsylvania. So this is a great Pennsylvania history story that I think is important for our children to know and to appreciate. And that's why my bill, I think we should celebrate and educate our children on this Pennsylvania story, and that's why I'm encouraging us to requiring schools to put it up somewhere in the building. It doesn't have to be in a classroom. It could be in the front door. It could be in the cafeteria. It could be anywhere in the building, somewhere that it could be there to acknowledge and maybe even start the conversation of, hey, where did that come from? Because it would be it's a great story to tell to our kids, a positive role model for our kids in our schools, so that they can learn something that happened in Pennsylvania, started in Pennsylvania basically, and became our national motto. So, in a nutshell, that's what the bill entails. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman and recognizes Chairman Roebuck for comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to be clear, and in part in your explanation of what you want, there is no specificity in the bill as to how the motto should be displayed. So that in effect, am I understanding that if you took a dollar bill and taped it on the wall, that would fulfill the requirements of the bill?
Yes, any way that these local schools decide to display it prominently, that would be fine. If they want to do it through an art project through their classrooms, if they want to there are plenty of organizations that give free posters with "In God We Trust" on it. There are lots of ways to display it that are actually of no cost, and they can put it up any way they want as long as it's up there for someone to see.
I have some problems in understanding what we're doing here. We're saying this is an important thing to do, yet by what you've just said, it seems like you could do it in a very minimal way and fulfill the requirements of the bill.
Well,
I'm not sure whether, and I'm saying this, I'm not sure whether I think the bill is a good idea or not, but if it is, as you're saying, a good idea to do, I'm not certain how just putting it somewhere in a school building fulfills any sort of purpose.
I did put the word "prominent display" in the bill, so I'm trying to leave flexibility to the school districts to display it the way they would want to, and didn't want to be that restrictive on it, but that's why we put the word "prominently." So hopefully, I let them decide what "prominently" is, but hopefully they would put it up in a way that's befitting our national motto and respectful of our national motto.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman and recognizes Representative Longgetti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this bill. And I certainly have great respect for my colleague. I have no problem with the words "In God We Trust." I guess my issue with this bill is twofold. One is, if you go to my office in Nervous, or if you go to my office in Hermitage, Pennsylvania, I do not have a plaque or a posting of In God We Trust. And it makes it difficult for me to tell schools that they should do something that I have not done in this regard. My second concern or issue is that I'm a man of faith. My faith is very important to me. I know the Maker's faith is very important to him. And, you know, one thing that I'm proud about my faith when I think about it is that my faith really fits, I believe, well with our Constitution. I have an obligation as a Christian to evangelize. The Great Commission tells me to go and make disciples. But it doesn't tell me to use the government to do that. And I think the reason that my faith is that way is because that's not very effective. It really doesn't change hearts. What changes hearts is when somebody on a personal level shares their faith. I think of my grandfather, who was very evangelical. When I went into his house, he didn't have In God We Trust displayed. He didn't have religious icons or pictures displayed. All he had was a Bible that he read. But if you ever sat down with him, invariably, in a very lovingly, caring way, he would share his faith. And that's what made a difference for me. That's what changed my heart. And I think when we do things like this, even though it's talked about from a historical perspective, we create the false impression that somehow we have done our duty in that we have accomplished what we, if we're a Christian, as I am, are called to do. And really, we've abrogated our duty. Our duty is to share on a personal level. That's what changes hearts. When I look at the Old Testament, I think of examples like Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were told by governments to worship their God, and they refused to do so because it was the condition of their heart. And so I really don't relish voting against this bill because I believe in God we trust as a person. But as a legislator and as a person of faith, I think my faith tells me not to do this, to do what I am called to do on a personal level. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes Representative Saccone. If you have comments.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I certainly respect my colleague and his position, his principal position. Everyone has their own way of looking at this. I don't look at this as being a bill about evangelizing. This is strictly honoring our national motto, which most of our modern presidents have honored, and our Congresses have reaffirmed over and over again, and also a way of putting positive things like this, virtuous examples, in front of our children. God knows they need it. I mean, when you look at our children today, our society just seems to be spiraling downward, and we need good examples to put in front of them. Here is a good example that's been reaffirmed by our Supreme Court. It's been upheld. As long as we do it in a historical sense, it's fine to post this anywhere. And it's a Pennsylvania story, something we can be proud of and celebrate. And so I look at it as educating our children. I've been involved in educating our youth most of my adult life. We'll deal with it. We'll deal with it. Thank you, Lord. Amen. Look, I guess my point is, if we don't teach our children to understand their history and love their country, the world will teach them not to these days. It's our duty as legislators and as educators and as parents to put these positive role models before our children. This is a great one. This is a great story. It's a great model. It's I can really find no wrong with it, and I really am taking the faith and the evangelistic part out of it. It's not about evangelizing. I'm not trying to go into the schools and convert children. I'm trying to give them a positive role model that is our national motto that's been reaffirmed over and over again. So that's what I'm looking at. Look, I don't have pictures of Abraham Lincoln in my office, but I'm a real fan of Abraham Lincoln, and the schools teach about Abraham Lincoln. I can't have everything. I have a lot of things in my office. You're welcome to come by, but I don't have everything. I can't have everything that the schools teach in there. So the fact that you know, whether you have an In God We Trust plaque in your office or not, That doesn't mean we should deny that to our children. We should be teaching them this. We should be exposing them to these things. And of course, it's there. It's a passive exposure because they don't have to look at it. If it's in the cafeteria wall or if it's over the front door, they can look at it or they don't have to look at it. But if they do look up at it, it might strike a question in their mind, like, hey, where did that come from? Or what, what's that all about? And maybe the next step is, and we say, hey, yeah, that's a Pennsylvania story. You know where that came from? Do you know about the story of our 13th governor and Abraham Lincoln and all these things? Do you know about that? And I looked at the history standards that we have in Pennsylvania, and I compared to some of the things I see in there. This would be it is a great history story to impart to our children. So that's my emphasis, not evangelism.
Chair thanks the gentleman and recognizes Representative Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Saccone, thank you for bringing this forward. Not every day that you have a bill that includes God before you. And for me, similar to Representative Longetti, I struggled with what to do here. And so for me, I did a little research last night and trying to come to grips with this business of God and the government and the Establishment Clause and all the rest. And I stumbled into, I'm not sure stumbling is the right word, but I found the U.S. Supreme Court case Lee versus V. Wiseman from 1992. And in that case, which was essentially a case related to school prayer, the majority, which was joined by Justice Kennedy, really struck a difference with respect to how we treat coinage and public buildings from schools. The court drew a real distinction when it came to schools in that case. And if you don't mind, I'll read the Kennedy language, one paragraph, that really is described by some as the coercion test with respect to the way that we should look at this. And writing for the majority in that case, Justice Kennedy observed, as we have observed before, there are heightened concerns with protecting freedom of conscience from subtle coercion pressure in the elementary and secondary public schools. Our decisions in the Ingle and Abington cases, prior cases, recognize, among other things, that prayer exists in public schools carry a particular risk of indirect coercion. The concern may not be limited to the context of schools, but it is most pronounced there. What to most believers may seem nothing more than a reasonable request, which is what I would consider your bill to be, that a non-believer respect their religious practices in a school context may appear to the non-believer or dissenter to be an attempt to employ the machinery of the state, in this case the Commonwealth, to enforce a religious orthodoxy. And so, for me, I have the Supreme Court that draws a distinction in that case between coinage and public buildings and schools. The second thing that I did is I did a little research of the sponsor of the In God We Trust motto, which is a congressman from Florida, Congressman Bennett. And with respect to the national motto being implemented by the U.S. Congress in 1956, I found one phrase from the congressman illustrative in this discussion. And he said, for the motto to be meaningful, it's got to be an operating philosophy in our lives, not a plaque on the wall. And so for me, I just can't imagine a scenario where something like this can be implemented without all kinds of court challenges. And that brings us to the financial condition of our school districts. I'm not sure how in the world the school districts would be able to endure financially the challenges that are sure to come with respect to implementing a policy like this. And so from the perspective of the financial components of this decision and the precedent established in the case that I cited, I think that the smart thing for us to do as a Commonwealth is to pass on this proposal with the full knowledge that as our children advance beyond the public school system, they'll have plenty of opportunities, and currently do have plenty of opportunities, to accept the motto, In God We Trust. So thank you for bringing it forward. For those reasons, I'll vote no.
The chair thanks the gentleman and recognizes Representative Saccone.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Representative Carroll. I appreciate your comments. I think this is different in a couple of ways. First of all, this isn't a prayer. This is our national motto, which the Supreme Court has held does not violate the Establishment Clause. It's not trying to establish a religion. And it's not coercing anyone. I mean, just because some people might not want to look at it or might not want to say it, it doesn't stop us from putting it up. I mean, people might not want to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, but we don't stop saying the Pledge of Allegiance because of it. We still go forward with it. You don't have to participate. You don't have to look at it. It's not a coercion. I have the original legislation when it was when In God We Trust was enacted in 1956, and Congress says in this that In God We Trust has such a strong claim as our national motto for the great spiritual and psychological value to our country to have a clearly designated motto of such inspirational quality. So it says In God We Trust is a superior and acceptable motto for the United States. So. You know, I just have to mention, I've already been getting some. We had a story about this in my hometown newspaper when I first introduced the bill, and I've already been getting some email from teachers. I had one negative, but I had many positives saying, we're really glad you're doing this. We would love to be able to do this in the schools, but you know, our schools have been chilled of putting anything in front of our kids that even has any taint of God in it, because you know they're afraid maybe of being sued or whatever, and so they don't. But here's one that they can, that the Supreme Court said you can. This passes muster. This is legal to put up anywhere. It doesn't violate the Establishment Clause. And so I think when we can, we should. And it will also inspire schools to be bold and say, look, we can do this. We have to follow certain criteria, but we still can do it. And we can put these things in front of our kids with the hope that some of it might sink in. Some of them might raise questions. Some of them might, you know, seek to find out more about it. It's a good thing for our children. And I think it's worth the risk that someone might challenge it, because I think it will pass muster, and it's worth it to the future of our kids. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, gentlemen, and recognizes Representative Santaserio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Saccone. When you said just a moment ago some of it might sink in, what did you mean by that?
Pardon me, could you say that again?
When you said just a moment ago some of it might sink in, what did you mean by that?
I think some of the history of what I just explained, all the background of, hey, this is a great Pennsylvania story where a person stood up for something they believed in, and it spread out not only through Pennsylvania but became our national motto. It's a great story of persistence and someone's belief in certain virtuous aspects of their life that they can push forward, and it actually became accepted and convinced others, and in fact actually convinced Congress to make this our national motto. So it's a great heroic story.
So let me make sure I understand what your intent here is. It sounds to me like your intent is that you believe, anyway, by putting In God We Trust in some prominent display in our schools, that this will engender kids to think about why it's there and ultimately inquire as to the history of the adoption of that motto, and ultimately find out that it was a Pennsylvanian who played a key role in that, and that history lesson will occur because of the posting of In God We Trust.
I think that's part of it, certainly.
Is there anything other part of it that your intent here?
Yeah, I think it's important. Like I said, I read some quotes from President Kennedy and others to say that, look, this is a great motto for a country, and from the legislation itself, they might ask about that. It might start a discussion on why it's our motto, and they can move on from that, and they could delve further into the history of our own country.
The phrase "In God We Trust," as you've said many times, is on our currency. It's on our bills. It's on our coins. So kids are exposed to that on a regular basis already. How do you think that including this now as a display in the schools is going to increase that exposure or increase the possibility that kids would start to think about that? I
think it's because you're now in an educational environment. So they're coming to school and they see it. They say, "Wow, hey, teach, why is this? What's that all about? Where do we get that motto anyway?" You're in a different format than when you're handling your dollar bills. So I just think it's another reinforcement of our motto.
Well, except I think the questions that Chairman Roebuck asked at the outset, I think you acknowledged that Under the bill, the way it's written right now, a school principal could tape a dollar bill to a wall, and that would comply with the letter of your bill. So I'm not sure how that necessarily achieves the end you just described any differently than actually a kid having it right in his wallet.
Yeah, I think I explained it. I included the word prominently. So if they want to interpret that as being prominent, then okay, maybe their local school board would look at that and say, you know what, we think this is a good idea. Maybe we'll make it bigger. Maybe we'll just tape the dollar bill. I left it up to them so that it wasn't so restrictive, that the local school districts could decide how to display it and in what manner.
What about the original national motto, E pluribus unum?
E pluribus unum was actually never our national motto. And the legislation in 1956 mentions that, refers to that. It's a nice saying. It's actually the Latin on our Great Seal, and that's what it was approved for. But it's never been our national motto.
It appears on our coins.
It may appear on our coins in some cases, but it is not our national motto, and it never was. It was originally designed to be on the Great Seal.
Okay. Would you be opposed to having that posted in our schools?
No, absolutely not. I think it's great.
Do you think having "In God We Trust" is more important?
I think that is our national motto, so I think that should be posted. If you want to have E pluribus unum up there and talk about that too, that's fine. But this is our national motto by law, so I think we should celebrate that. And that's the story that's tied more directly to Pennsylvania than E pluribus unum. So I think it's important that you have "In God We Trust," our national motto, displayed.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, if I may, just some comments. Thank you, Mr. Saccone. Mr. Chairman, I think part of the problem here, and I think both Representatives Carroll and Longgetti were very eloquent in their reasons why this is perhaps not the best idea, and I concur with what they said, and I too will be voting no on this proposal. But there's another problem as well. It seems to me that these types of bills, and if they become laws, ultimately laws, trivialize. In that I don't know, frankly, that there is much of an impact by having someone write the words "In God We Trust" in schools, whether, especially the way this bill is written, it could be done in such a minimal manner that, frankly, it's unclear to me that anyone would really notice. Whether this is just one of these measures that are rolled out, and perhaps everyone feels good by passing it, but at the end of the day, I don't know that it amounts to much more than foisting yet another requirement on our schools, yet another obligation of government on our schools, at a time when, they're seeing their budgets cut, they're having difficulty providing education for our kids. And I share the concerns that Justice Kennedy articulated in the excerpts from the opinion that Representative Carroll just read, because I think there is a major distinction. And I'm not saying this is your intent, Representative Saccone, but I think there is a major distinction when you do things in schools, because kids are much more impressionable. Kids feel much more pressure than adults do. And I think that's probably why the court drew that distinction. It's our national model. I understand that. At the end of the day, I think putting it up in schools is really not going to have the impact that you think it's going to have. I don't think kids are going to start to inquire where that came from, no more than they do now by seeing it on dollar bills or anywhere else posted in society. And I think at the end of the day, it does run the risk of trivializing an important concept that the Congress thought was so important that they actually turned it into our national motto back in 1956. So for those reasons, respectfully, I'm going to vote no. Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentleman and recognizes Representative Fleck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I try and be respectful of all religions, although I do consider myself an evangelical Christian, and when I look back at the history, and I'm a historian, when I look back at the history of our Commonwealth and why it was formed by William Penn for religious freedom, there was one thing that they all agreed on, was the Christian God, the deity. And I applaud your efforts. I certainly am supportive. And want to give a shout out to my constituent that passed away in 2008, Dr. George Dougherty, who fought to have One Nation Under God put in the pledge. He was the minister in D.C. and Eisenhower's minister who he lobbied hard in the 50s. So for the detractors who don't think it'll have, a big impact, then what's the big deal? Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentleman and recognizes Representative Mulchaney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a couple questions to ask, and that is, from a historical perspective, if "In God We Trust" is something that we believe should be in the schools and posted prominently, I wonder if the story of the national motto, which you pointed to as a historical part of Pennsylvania, is part of Pennsylvania students' curriculum. So my question, I guess, would be, because, is the historical nature of the origin of the motto part of the learning process and within the curriculum? And is Pennsylvania history part of the curriculum currently? Because I do think that there should be some context, right? I don't think it's going to inspire kids to necessarily ask a ton of questions, and I think that you just mentioned that there's a real Pennsylvania story here, and I question, is that part of the curriculum currently?
Chair recognizes Representative Saccone.
Thank you, and thank you for your question. Currently, it's not part of the curriculum. I brought the education standards. We teach Pennsylvania history in grade 3, 6, 9, and 12, and in various years we teach them different things. Teach them a little about William Penn, Benjamin Franklin, so forth. And as they get older, we teach them more about different people. But we don't. It's not included in our current curriculum. Personally, I would love to see it as part of our curriculum. That would be a different step and a different time. I think getting it up in the schools first is a great start, and if there's enough interest in it, I think it should be. I would be in favor of including it in our curriculum because I think it is a great story, and I think our kids would benefit from learning it. If I could add one more comment, Mr. Chairman, if you'd indulge me, I don't think this trivializes it at all. I think maybe having it on the dollar bill, people don't notice it very much, but this would celebrate it. This would help celebrate our national motto, and I don't think there's a lot of confusion. I see even not just among children, but among adults about whether E pluribus unum or what is our national motto. They don't know. Adults don't know. So kids certainly don't know either. This celebration of our national motto, I think, will help to clarify that, and also, again, I think reinforce an important principle to our children, and they certainly need it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentlelady and the gentleman, and recognizes Representative Tallman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and probably Representative Saccone can't answer this question, so I'm going to ask it for the legal authorities. And this is going to follow on what Representative Fleck said. William Penn said, "We must be governed by God or we'll be ruled by tyrants." So if I display that in the hallways or in the classroom of a school, is that a violation? Or what the people are opponents? If I display that quote from the founding of our Commonwealth, does that cause problems? Thank you.
Representative Saccone, would you want to make comments to that or not?
Yeah,
you don't have to. He just made a comment.
No, I did want to add, it sparked something else in my mind about, I think we could display that. I mean, if you look around the Capitol here, we have all kinds of religious quotations. In fact, if you stand in the rotunda and look up, you'll see William Penn's quote, "My God will make this a seat of a nation." So it's right there in big letters for you. So, no, I think you can display that. There's no problem with that. But I wanted to touch on something someone else said about all religions. One of the beauties of this also, and I think the Supreme Court looked at this when they said it passed muster to be displayed in public buildings of all sorts, was that it can be viewed by any religion. And I've been to religious exercises in all over the world, in many, many countries. I've traveled to 70 countries, and I've been involved in just about every religious practice to participate and share and worship with friends and so forth around the world. But the word God, and that's what the Supreme Court looked at, is general enough that the Muslims in my district who've already came to me, talked about it, they're good with that. Jewish people can also be all right with that. And people can interpret God in their own way. Hindus can look at it and say, I'll interpret it in my own way. So it applies to everybody. It's not establishing one particular religion, and that's why the Supreme Court, they commented on that in their case that said, this is something that's general. It doesn't violate the Establishment Clause. And the beauty of it is it can be embraced by people of all faiths, and I encourage people of all faiths to embrace it. And I certainly respect all religious faiths. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Recognizes Representative Wheatley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I will tell you this is very difficult for me because as I was listening to the other members in the committee talk about it from the various perspectives, I was just reflecting on my own journey and spiritual walk. I'm certainly not a Bible-thumping member of my Christian faith, but I certainly have traveled various faith attitudes towards faith, one of a disbeliever to one that studied Islam to one that came back home to my Christian beliefs. And whenever we start having these conversations about God and faith, we live in a country that primarily promotes and support the Christian belief. I'm just thinking back to when we passed the year of the Bible last year and how much heat this body took because we didn't pass the year of the Quran, or, we didn't pass something that reflected the non-believers or those who have a different type of walk. But as you heard earlier, educational institutions are different. I look at them as very much different because a lot of my walk and the different journeys was because I was exposed to different folk in my educational institutions. Now, it wasn't something that was structured. It just happened. I happened to be good friends with an individual who was a Muslim. And after visiting his home and getting exposed to their type of understanding and belief, I started to study that way. Then went somewhere else and got associated with people who weren't necessarily into structured faith, but other ways to exhibit themselves. And because of that exposure, started to study it for myself and what made sense for me. Education, in my opinion, should be one that doesn't try to limit the conversation, but expose all of our children and all of our young folk to different conversations so that they can kind of learn for themselves. I do agree with Chairman Roebuck in his opening statement that if, in fact, we believe that the history of this statement and the meanings, all of its ramifications of its meanings are important, then we should prominently put it in a structured way to expose children and young folk so that they can interact in it, so that they can have a real understanding of not only how it came about, but all of the manifestations of what the realities are from all the various stakeholders. There is a conversation to be had of how it even became that God is in that conversation for the non-believer, for the person who believes in something different totally than Christian principles. There should be a way for that to be expressed, for them to have a chance to hear it and learn it and search it for themselves. So my struggle has always been, I look at this as like, for me personally, and forgetting the legal thing that might happen, would I mind terribly if my son or daughter walked in a building and they saw "In God We Trust" on the building? No, I wouldn't. Matter of fact, I think prayer in school, for me personally, wouldn't affect me or my children, but that's my person. We represent more than us. So I'm sure there's a lot of individuals who I serve who, when they send their children to that school, they would not want to see "In God We Trust," or if they see "In God We Trust," they would like to see a whole bunch of other things that reflects their walk. And that becomes the challenge. How do we balance it? I'm sitting here and I'm trying to really, I know when I go to church on Sunday, if I vote against this, somebody's going to talk to me about voting against this. You know, how could I be against God or the words of "In God We Trust"? And I'm certainly not against that. And that's what I'm trying to. But I do think we have to be very particular how we structure this stuff so that it's not just words on the wall. It's not just coinage that is posted in someone's pocket, but it has some meaning and it leads to a greater understanding of everyone's role. Because I don't think in any of my teachings in the faith that just because you didn't believe in me or what I was talking, that you were discarded forever. You know what I mean? Right. So there should be some connectivity. There should be some structure that ties what they see when they walk in the building and have an opportunity to express it from their own perspective. And because of that, you know, I will find it difficult to vote for this in the committee. But I would like to work with you and others, whoever, you know, because I do believe, you know, we have to be a lot more or less sensitive to using the words and having faith be a part of our discussion in our educational environment. So I would love to work with you and try to figure out how we can do that in a balanced way. But I don't want to vote for this and then this be separated from actual ways to learn and invite real discussions of all aspects of what this truly means from a historical perspective, but also from a faith or non-faith perspective. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman and recognizes Representative Saccone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Wheatley. I respect your comments there, and I'm happy to work with you or anyone on this topic. As I said, I do embrace, and I've studied Islam in Egypt. I been to Sufi services in Turkey. I've done a lot of those. I respect other religions. So I think the beauty, as I said before, is this motto, and why it's so important is it can be accepted by just about all faiths. And you know, even if you don't appreciate that, when you walk in this building, "In God We Trust" is on the front steps there. You know, you may not agree with it, but it's there. It's there for us because it is our national motto by law. And this I say it again. The fact that I put in there prominently, I think, encourages the school districts to display it in a respectful way, but it gives them the flexibility to display it in whatever way they want. So I was trying not to be too restrictive in how they display this. So I think this is a first step. I think by putting it up and celebrating it, and next year will be lots of celebrations on the 150th anniversary, and the new "In God We Trust" museum that's coming. I think it's a good first step. And I think there's more steps to be taken after that, but I hope that you'll look into your hearts and side with me on getting this up so that our children can enjoy it and understand our history and love their country.
Chair thanks the gentleman for their comments and recognizes for a second time Representative Santisario.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I don't want to belabor this because, frankly, we've spent 45 minutes talking about this bill in a time when we have some real issues with our schools. You know, I just don't think it's a compelling enough reason at the end of the day to try to get our kids to learn about the fact that a Pennsylvanian played a role in coming up with this motto, which is, as far as I can glean so far based on the statements this morning, the chief purpose of this bill. Moreover, I don't think this bill accomplishes that at the end of the day. And I would suggest, as a former history teacher myself, that there are probably many more things in American history that are far more important for our kids to learn, and we should be spending time focusing on that, and not something which, at the end of the day, I think is more of a feel-good piece of legislation than anything else. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Recognizes Chairman Roebuck for comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I listened to the discourse on this particular legislation, it struck me that, at least in part, we slipped into the discussion of not God as God universal, but we tended to talk about believers and non-believers. We put it in a Christian context. I'm Christian. I understand that. I'm very active in my church, and I, like Representative Wheatley, don't look forward sometimes to Sundays when I get the hard questions about the things we do in Harrisburg. Not necessarily on this, but on a lot of other things. But I think that I think that points out part of the problem here. that although we talk about God as universal, God as neutral, God that embraces all religions, it doesn't, the context we're arguing it in is largely a context of Christianity. I remember very well high school. High school that I went to was probably 50%, 60% Jewish in terms of the students. Yet I had the history teacher who every morning wrote the Bible verse on the board, and I don't know whether that converted any of my Jewish students or gave them any different perspective, but I'm not certain that was helpful in any way other than to that individual teacher who did that. So I think we have to be very careful with what we're doing here. And I don't want to see us certainly trivialize this by saying we can put this phrase any place and that's sufficient to meet the terms of this legislation. I also sat here and thought that as I sit in the chamber of the House, I oftentimes think we ought to think about revising the picture in front of the legislative structure, the House chamber, which has very prominently the figure of Thaddeus Stevens, who was, after all, the founder of public education in Pennsylvania. And as we move away from that commitment to a free and full public education system, perhaps he no longer belongs there, or else we aren't looking at him hard enough to remind us of that principle of our state's history and how important that is. So I would, for all those reasons, I would certainly find it difficult to vote for this, and I would wish that we could approach this in a different way that would be more appropriate to meet what you're trying to do. And I thank the chairman for his indulgence.
Chair thanks the gentleman for his comments. I myself support this bill. I talked with a number of educators, those who are still in practice and those who are retired, community people, when I knew that this bill would be coming up, and I said very clearly to them, what do you think? Is this something that we should contend with? And I had near unanimous support, and not only from the people in my district, but when I went to different outings as well outside my district in Bucks County, Montgomery County, and I had the opportunity to converse with so many diverse individuals, and they thought that this is something that in God we trust is something that not only celebrate the 150th anniversary, but we remind school children that that here is maybe a line of comfort for their hearts and for their minds in such troubled days. Having said that, I'll ask the secretary to take the roll.
Chairman Clymer?
Yes.
Representative Bowman?
Proxy, yes.
Representative Christiana? Representative Emmerich?
Yes.
Representative English?
Yes.
Representative Fleck?
Yes.
Representative Gillen?
Yes.
Representative Grove?
Proxy,
Representative O'Neill? Representative O'Neill? No. Representative Rapp? Representative Reese?
Yes.
Representative Rock?
Yes.
Representative Simmons?
Yes.
Representative Tallman?
Yes.
Representative Truitt?
Yes.
Chairman Roebuck?
No.
Representative Carroll? No. Representative Clay?
Yes.
Representative Conklin?
Proxy, no.
Representative Harkins?
No.
Representative Longetti? Representative Mulchaney?
hey, I can't
Representative
talk this
O'Brien?
time in the meeting. I'll call you back.
Representative Santasero?
No.
Representative Wheatley?
No.
The vote was 14-9. I pass them by a majority vote. The bill will be reported to the Speaker of the House. Chair thanks each and every one for their commentary, and we will move forward to the next item on our agenda, House Resolution 108. We have Rosemary Brown here, who will give an overview on her legislation. This deals with the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee a study of the status of character education in public schools. So,
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank
welcome.
you. As we continue the conversation,
Can I just interrupt you for
Sure.
one moment? There is a motion by Representative English, seconded by Representative Simmons, that we move the bill forward.
thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and due in light of the time, and I think this resolution is pretty self-explanatory. So it is to do a study to see what type of character education our schools are performing. And I think it'll be very useful information as we move forward and we look at character education in our curriculum. Thank you.
Is there any questions from the members of the committee? Seeing none, the chair will call for a vote. Are there any negative votes on House Resolution 108? Seeing no negative votes, it passes by unanimous vote and will be reported to the Speaker of the House. This concludes our agenda for this morning. Chair thanks everyone for being here today. And a reminder that next Tuesday we do have a public hearing here in the Capitol, so keep that on your calendars. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.